you. Because by opposing it and getting tense and fighting it and digging in your heels, you become a tenser, more angry, irritated, frightened person. And probably the very thing that should not change, which is a quiet mind and a confident, trusting, loving heart, now has changed into a frightened, angry, reactionary heart. In your attempt to oppose change, you fell into the worst change of all, you see. So we have to pay attention. One other thing I'll say about your question I think is very helpful is when you tell the story about the YMCA, it's such a fascinating story because it speaks of social migration. And that's another part of this that relates to what Joe talked about last night and is very, very relevant. And I think it's relevant in Indiana because one of the things we have to realize is that when people start moving around, everything changes. One way to understand the revivals of history are revivals that occur in responses to migration. So, for example, revivalism of the late 1800s was very much a revival involving migration of East Coast people to the Western Prairie, which was then Indiana and Ohio and Kentucky and all the rest. And that tent meeting, frontier preacher revivalism that developed out of that was one wave. Then there's another wave as all those Midwestern people start moving to cities like Fort Wayne. They move off their farms and they move to middle-sized cities. But what happens now in a place like the Midwest, in the Rust Belt, where you have thousands and thousands of small towns that there's no foreseeable end to the decline of the population. The county where I grew up in New York, in rural New York, there's a bumper sticker people wear there that says, "Will the last person to leave Cattaraugus County please turn out the lights?" And there's just feeling that everybody's just fleeing. And then they go to the cities. Well, first they went to the suburbs. That's where Billy Graham crusades, that's what they were all about. They were about getting all the suburban people to move from the towns. That's what churches like Willow Creek and Saddleback are about. They're collector churches for migrating people largely from the Midwest. But now we're dealing with new migrations that are very complex. And it's not just here in America. This is the story of Africa. So as missiologists, as people who care about this, paying attention to migrations and social patterns is very, very important. In fact, one last thing I'll say is that I think the older I get, the less I think that intellectual history is the engine, and the more I think that social history is the engine. And intellectual history is one of the cars after the engine. Maybe it's a fuel car for the engine, but the engine is social history. It's these kinds of movements that you're talking about, so it's very important.
Thank you, Brian. We're going to take a break here for lunch in just a minute, and to kind of give you an update, a couple things you need to know about. The lunch is in the Commons area, and during lunchtime, we have another experience station you're welcome to visit called the Listening Lounge, not to be confused with the Lizard Lounge. The Listening Lounge is in the corner of the lobby.
This video is put together by Off the Map, a nonprofit here in Seattle. If you'd like to look at any other items or products, head to offthemap.com. Click on products. You can see some of our books we have. One is Jim and Casper Go to Church, A Believer and Atheist in an Unlikely Friendship. Frank conversations about faith, churches, and well-meaning Christians. Also available is a DVD companion to the book with live interviews and small group questions. Another book available is Evangelism Without Additives, What If Evangelism Just Meant Being Yourself? And also available is The Lost Interviews, as we interview supposed lost people about their views and experiences with Christianity to help better understand the faith ourselves.